Are we ready? Book 1. Take 1. Chapter 1. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't own this book. I didn't write this book. This lady did. Smart lady. She owns it. I'm reading it. Just saying, so there ain't no copyright. Clearly my voice, but I didn't write it. I'm just reading it. Okay? Here we go. Chapter 1. No comments on my potentially shitty reading because this is my first time reading things out loud and it kind of scares the pants out of me, which is why I'm doing this project. Okay, here we go. Take 1. It was raining in Richmond on Friday, June 6th. The relentless downpour, which began at dawn, beat the lilies to naked stalks, and blackdrop and sidewalks were littered with leaves. There were small rivers in the streets, and newborn ponds on playing fields and lawns. I went to sleep with the sound of water drumming on the slate roof, and was dreaming a terrible dream as night dissolved into the foggy first hours of Saturday morning. I saw a white face beyond the rain-streaked glass, a face formless and inhumane, like the faces of misshapen dolls made of nylon hose. My bedroom window was dark when suddenly the face was there, an evil intelligence looking in. I woke up and stared blindly into the dark. I did not know what had awakened me until the telephone rang. I found the receiver without fumbling. Dr. Scoppetta? Yes, I said. I reached for the lamp and switched it on. It was 2:33 a.m. My heart was drilling through my ribs. Pete Moreno here. We got us one at 5602 Berkeley Ave. Think you better come. The victim's name, he went on to explain, was Laurie Patterson, a white female, 30 years old. Her husband had found her body about half an hour earlier. Details were unnecessary. The moment I picked up the receiver and recognized Sergeant Moreno's voice, I knew. Maybe I knew the instant the telephone rang. People who believe in werewolves are afraid of a full moon. I began to dread the hours between midnight and 3 a.m. when Friday becomes Saturday and the city is unconscious. I like that time, but... Ordinarily, the medical officer on call is summoned to a death scene, but this wasn't ordinary. I made it clear after the second case that no matter the hour, if there was another murder, I was to be called. Moreno wasn't keen on the idea. Ever since I was appointed Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Virginia less than 2 years ago, he'd been difficult. I wasn't sure if he didn't like women or if he just didn't like me. Berkeley's in Berkeley down, south side, he said condescendingly. You know the way? I confessed I didn't. I scribbled the directions on the notepad I always kept by the phone. I hung up and my feet were already on the floor as adrenaline hit my nerves like espresso. The house was quiet. I grabbed my black medical bag, scuffed and worn from years of use. The night air was like a cool sauna, and there was no lights in the windows of my neighbors' houses. As I backed the Navy station wagon out the drive, I looked up at the light burning over the porch, at the first-story window leading into the guest bedroom where my 10-year-old niece Lucy was asleep. This would be one more day in the child's life I would miss. I had picked her up at the airport Wednesday night. Our meals together so far had been few. There was no traffic until I hit Parkway. Minutes later, I was speeding across the James River. Tail lights far ahead were like rubies. The downtown skyline ghosted in the rearview mirror. Fanning out on either side were plains of darkness with tiny necklaces of smudged lights at the edges. Out there, somewhere, is a man, I thought. He could be anybody. Walks upright, sleeps with a roof over his head, and has the usual number of fingers and toes. He is probably white and much younger than my 40 years. He is ordinary by most standards and probably doesn't drive a BMW or grace the streets in the Slip or the finer clothing stores along the main street. But, then again, he could. He could be anybody, and he could be nobody. Mr. Nobody. The kind of guy you don't remember after riding 20 floors alone with him in the elevator. He had become the self-appointed dark ruler of the city, an obsession for thousands of people he had never seen, and an obsession of mine, Mr. Nobody. Because the homicides began 2 months ago, he may have been recently released from prison or a mental hospital. This was the speculation last week, but the theories were consistently changing. Mine had remained the same from the start. I strongly suspected he hadn't been in the city long, and he had done this before, somewhere else. That he hadn't spent a day behind the locked doors of a prison or forensic unit. He wasn't disorganized, wasn't an amateur, and he was most assuredly wasn't crazy. Wiltshire was 2 lights down on the left, Berkeley the first right after that. I could see the blue and red lights flashing 2 blocks away. In the street front of 5602, Berkeley was lit up like a disaster site. An ambulance, its engine rumbling loudly, was alongside 2 unmarked police units with grille lights flashing and 3 white cruisers with light bars going full tilt. The Channel 12 news crew had pulled up. Lights had blinked up and down the street, and several people in pajamas and housecoats had wandered out to their porches. I parked behind the news van as the cameraman trotted across the street. Head bent, the collar of my khaki raincoat turned up around my ears. I briskly followed the brick walk to the front door. I have always had a special distaste for seeing myself on the evening news. Since the strangling in Richmond began, my office had been inundated, the same reporters calling over and over again with the same insensitive questions. If it's a serial killer, Dr. Scarpetta, doesn't that indicate that it's quite likely to happen again? As if they wanted it to happen again. Is it true you found bite marks on the last victim, Doc? It was true, but no matter how I answered such a question, I couldn't win. No comment. They assure me, assume it's the same. No. With the next edition reads, Dr. K. Scarpetta denies that bite marks have been found on the victims' bodies. The killer, who's reading the papers, like everyone else, gets a new idea. Recent new accounts were florid and frighteningly detailed. They went far beyond serving the usual purpose of warning the city's citizens. Women, particularly those who lived alone, were terrified, and the sale of handguns and deadbolt locks went up 50% the week after the 3rd murder, and the SPCA ran out of dogs, a phenomenon which, of course, made the front page news too. Yesterday, the infamous prize-winning police reporter Abby Turnbull had demonstrated her usual brass by coming to my office and clubbing my staff with the Freedom of Information Act in an unsuccessful attempt to get copies of the autopsy report. Crime reporting was aggressive in Richmond, an old Virginian city of 220,000, which last year listed by the FBI as having the 2nd highest homicide rate per capita in the United States. It wasn't uncommon for forensic pathologists from the British Commonwealth to spend a month in my office to learn more about gunshot wounds. It wasn't uncommon for career cops like Pete Moreno to leave the madness of New York or Chicago only to find Richmond worse. What was uncommon were these sex slayings. The average citizen can't relate to drug and domestic shootouts or one wino stabbing another over a bottle of Mad Dog, but these murdered women were the colleagues you sit next to at work, the friends you invite to go shopping or to stop by for drinks, the acquaintances you chat with at parties, the people you stand in line with at the checkout. They were someone's neighbor, someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone's lover. They were in their own homes, sleeping in their own beds when Mr. Nobody climbed through one of their windows. 2 uniformed men flanked the front door, which opened wide and barred with a yellow ribbon of tape warning crime scene, do not cross. I'm sorry if you can hear snoring. My dog is really loud. Just saying. Doc! He could have been my son, this boy in blue, who stepped aside at the top of the steps and lifted the tape to let me duck under. Oh, Jutta. Jesus. The living room is immaculate and attractively decorated in warm rose tones. A handsome cherry cabinet in the corner contained a small television and a compact disc player. Nearby, a stand held sheet music and a violin. Beneath the curtained window, overlooking the front lawn, was a sectional sofa, and on the glass coffee table were half a dozen magazines neatly stacked. Among them were Scientific American and the New England Journal of Medicine. Across a Chinese dragon rug with a rose medallion against a field of cream stood a walnut bookcase. Tomes straight from a medical school syllabi lined 2 shelves. An open doorway led into a corridor running the length of the house. To my right appeared a series of rooms. To the left was the kitchen, where Moreno and a young officer were talking to a man I assumed was the husband. I was vaguely aware of clean countertops, linoleum, and appliances in the off-white that manufacturers call almond, and the pale yellow of the wallpaper and curtains. But my attention was riveted to the table. On the top lay a red nylon knapsack, which contents had been gone through by the police: a stethoscope, a pen light, a Tupperware container, once packed with a meal or a snack, and the recent editions of Annals of Surgery, Lancet, and the Journal of Trauma. By now, I was thoroughly unsettled. Moreno eyed me coolly as I paused by the table, then introduced me to Matt Peterson, the husband. Peterson was slumped in a chair, his face destroyed by shock. He was exquisitely handsome, almost beautiful, his features flawlessly chiseled, his hair jet black, his smooth skin hinting of a tan. He was wide-shouldered, with a lean but elegantly sculpted body, casually clad in a white Izod shirt and faded blue jeans. His eyes were cast down, his hands stiffly in his lap. "These are hers?" I had to know. The medical items might belong to the husband. Moreno's "yeah" was a confirmation. Peterson's eyes lifted. Deep blue, bloodshot. They seemed relieved as they fixed on me. The doctor had arrived, a ray of hope, when there was none. He muttered into the truncated sentences of a mind fragmented and stunned. "I talked to her on the phone last night. She told me she'd be home around 12:30 from VMC, the ER. I got here, found the lights out, and thought she'd already gone to bed. Then I went in there." His voice rose, quavering, and he took a deep breath. I went in there, the bedroom. His eyes were desperate and welling, and he was pleading with me. "Please, I don't want people looking at her, seeing her like that, please." I gently told him, "She has to be examined, Mr. Peterson." A fist suddenly banged on the table, and a startled outburst of rage. "I know!" His eyes were wild. "But all of them? The police? Everybody?" His voice was shaking. "I know how it is. Reporters and everybody crawling over the place. I don't want every son of a bitch and his brother staring at her." Moreno didn't bat an eye. "Hey, I got a wife too, Matt. I know where you're coming from, alright? You got my word she gets respect. The same respect I'd want if it was me sitting in your chair, okay?" A sweet balm of lies. The dead are defenseless, and the violation of this woman, like the others, had only begun. I knew it would not end until Laurie Peterson was turned inside out, every inch of her photographed and on display for experts, police, attorneys, judges, and members of a jury to see. There would be thoughts, remarks about our physical attributes, or lack of them. There would be sophomoric jokes and cynical asides from the victim, not the killer, went on trial. Every aspect of her person and the way she lived scrutinized, judged, and in some instances degraded. A violent death is a public event, and it was this facet of my profession that so rudely grated against my sensibilities. I did what I could to preserve the dignity of victims, but there was little I could do after the person became a case number, a piece of evidence passed from hand to hand. Privacy is destroyed completely as life. Moreno led me out of the kitchen, leaving the officer to continue questioning Peterson. "Have you taken your photos yet?" I asked. "IDs are in there now, dusting everything," he said, referring to the identification section officers processing the scene. "I told him to give the body a wide berth." We paused in the hallway. On the walls were several nice watercolors and a collection of photographs depicting the husband and wife's respective graduating classes, and one artistic color shot of the young couple leaning against a weathered piling before backdrop of the beach, their legs and trousers rolled up to their calves, the wind ruffling their hair, their faces ruddy from the sun. She was pretty in life, blonde with delicate features and an engaging smile. She went to Brown and then Harvard for medical school. Her husband's undergraduate years were spent at Harvard. This was where they must have met, and apparently he was younger than she. She, Laurie Peterson, Brown, Harvard, brilliant, 30 years old, about to have it all realized, her dream. After 8 grueling years, at least, of medical training, a physician, all of it destroyed after a few minutes of a strangler's aberrant pleasure. Moreno touched my elbow. I turned away from the photographs as he directed my attention to the open door just ahead on the left. "Here's how he got in," he said. There was a small room with a white tile floor and walls papered in Williamsburg blue. There was a toilet and a lavatory and a straw clothes hamper. The window above the toilet was open wide, a square of blackness through which cool, moist air seeped and stirred the starchy white curtains. Beyond, in the dark, dense trees, cicadas were tensely soaring. What does that mean? Anyway. The screen's cut. Moreno's face was expressionless as he glanced at me. It's leaning against the back of the house, right under the windows, a picnic table bench. Apparently he pulled it up so we could climb in. I scanned the floor, the sink, the top of the toilet. I didn't see dirt or smudges or footprints, but it was hard to tell from where I was standing, and I had no intention of running the risk of contaminating anything. Was the window locked? I asked. Didn't look like it. All the others were locked. Already checked. Seems like she would have gone to a lot of trouble to make sure this one was. Of all the windows, this is the most vulnerable, close to the ground. It's back where no one can see what's going on. Better than coming in through the bedroom window because the guy's quiet. She's going to hear him cutting the screen and climbing in this far down the hall. And the doors? Were they locked when the husband got home? He says so. Then the killer went out the same way he came in, I decided. Looks that way. Tidy squirrel, don't you think? He was holding on to the door frame, leaning forward without stepping inside. Don't see anything in here. Maybe he wiped up after himself to make sure he didn't leave footprints on the john or on the floor. It's been raining all day. His eyes were flat and they fixed on me. His feet should have been wet, maybe muddy. I wondered where Moreno was going with this. He was hard to read. I'd never decided if he was a good poker player or simply slow. He was exactly the sort of detective I avoided when given a choice. A cock of the wall and absolutely unreachable. He was pushing 50, a face life had chewed on, and long wisps of green hair parted long on one side and combed over his balding pate. At 6 feet tall, he was bay-windowed from decades of... That's quite funny. He was bay-windowed from decades of bourbon or beer. His unfashionably wide red and blue striped tie was oily around the neck from summers of sweat. Moreno was the stuff of tough grey guy flicks, a crude, crass gumshoe who probably had foul-mouthed parrot for a pet, and a coffee table littered with Hustler magazines. I went the length of the hallway and stopped outside the master bedroom. I felt myself go hollow inside. An ID officer was busy coating every surface with black dusting powder, and a second officer was capturing everything on videotape. Laurie Pedersen was on top of the bed, a blue and white stripe hanging off the foot of the bed. The top sheet was kicked down and bunched beneath her feet. The cover sheet pulled free of the top corners and exposing the mattress. The pillows shoved to the right side of her head. The bed was the vortex of a violent storm, surrounded by undisturbed civility of middle-class bedroom furnishings of polished oak. She was nude. On the colourful rag rug to the right of the bed, her pale yellow cotton gown. It was slit from collar to hem. This was consistent with the 3 previous cases. On the nightstand nearest the door was a telephone, a cord ripped out of the wall. The 2 lamps on either side of the bed were out, the electrical cord severed from them. One cord bound around her wrist, where it was pinioned at the small of her back. The other cord was tied in a diabolically creative pattern also consistent with the first 3 cases. Looped once around her neck, it was threaded behind her through a cord around her wrists and lightly lashed around her ankles. As long as her knees were bent, the loop around her neck remained loose. When she straightened her legs, either in a reflex of pain or because the assailant's weight was on top of her, the ligature around her neck tightened like a noose. Death by asphyxiation takes only several minutes. That's a very long time when every cell of your body is screaming for air. You can come on in, Doc, the officer with the video camera was saying. I've got all this on film. Watching where I walked, I approached the bed. Next, set my bag on the floor and got out a pair of surgical gloves. Next, I set up my camera and took several photographs of her body in situ. Her face was grotesque, swollen beyond recognition and a dark bluish purple from the suffusion of blood caused by the tight ligature around her neck. Bloody fluid had leaked from her nose and mouth, staining the sheet. Her straw blonde hair was in disarray. She was moderately tall, no less than 5'7", and considerably fleshier than the younger version captured in the photographs down the hall. Her physical appearance was important because the absence of a pattern was also becoming a pattern. The 4 strangling victims seemed to have no physical characteristics in common, not even race. The 3rd victim was black and very slender. The 1st victim was a redhead and plump, and the 2nd a brunette and petite. They had different professions, a schoolteacher, a freelance writer, a receptionist, and now a physician. They lived in different areas of the city. Fetching a long chemical thermometer from my bag, I took the temperature of the room and then of her body. The air was 71 degrees, her body 93.5. Time of death is more elusive than most people think. It can't be pinned down exactly unless the time of death was witnessed or the victim's Timex stopped ticking. But Laurie Pedersen had been dead no more than 3 hours. Her body had been cooling just between 1 and 2 degrees per hour, and rigor had started in the small muscles. I looked for any obvious trace evidence that might not survive the trip to the morgue. There were no loose hairs on the skin, but I found a multitude of fibres, most of which no doubt were from the bed covers. With forceps, I collected a sampling of them, minuscule whitish ones, and several ones seeming to have come from a dark blue or black material. I placed them in small metal evidence buttons. The most obvious evidence was the musky smell, the patches of a residue, transparent and dried like glue, on the upper front and back of her legs. Seminal fluid was present in all the cases, yet it was of little serological value. The assailant was one of the 20% of the population who enjoyed the distinction of being a non-secretor. This meant his blood-type antigens could not be found in his other body fluids, such as saliva, semen, or sweat. Absent a blood sample, in other words, he couldn't be typed. He could have been AB, or anything. As recently as 2 years earlier, the killer's non-secretor status would have been a crushing blow to the forensic investigation. But now there was DNA profiling, newly introduced and potentially significant enough to identify an assailant to the exclusion of all other human beings, provided the police caught him first and obtained the biological samples, and he didn't have an identical twin. Moreno was inside the bedroom right behind me. The bathroom window, he said, looking at the body. Well, according to the husband in there, jerked a thumb in the direction of the kitchen, the reason was unlocked because he unlocked it last weekend. I just listened. He says that bathroom's hardly ever used unless they got company. Seems he was replacing the screen last weekend. Says it's possible he forgot to relock the window when he finished. The bathroom's not used all week. She, he glanced at the body, has no reason to give it a thought. She assumes it's locked. A pause. Kind of interesting, the only window the killer tried, it appears, was that window. The one unlocked. The screens to the rest of them aren't cut. How many windows are in the back of the house, I asked. 3. In the kitchen, the half bath, and in the bedroom in there. And all of them have slide-up sashes with latch locked at the top. You got it. Meaning if you shone a light from the latch lock from the outside, you probably could see whether it's fastened or not. Maybe. Those flat, unfriendly eyes again. But only if you climbed up something to look. You couldn't look from the ground. You mentioned a picnic bench, I reminded him. Probably with that backyard soggy as hell, the legs of the bench would have been depressed in the lawn if the guy tried to put it up against the other windows or stood on top to have a look. I got a couple of men poking around out there now. No depressions under the other 2 windows. Doesn't look like the killer went near him. What it does look like is he went straight to the bathroom window down the hall. Is it possible to have a look? Is it possible it might have been open a crack and that's why the killer went straight to it? Moreno conceded, hey, anything's possible, but if it was open a crack, maybe she would have noticed it too at some point during the week. Maybe, maybe not. It's easy to be observant retrospectively, but most people don't pay that much attention to every detail of their residences, especially to rooms scarcely used. Beneath the curtained window overlooking the street was a desk containing other numbing reminders that Laurie Peterson and I were of the same profession. Scattered over the blotter were several medical journals, the principles of surgery, and Dorland's. Near the base of the brass gooseneck lamp were 2 computer diskettes. The label was tersely dated, 6th the 1st, in felt-tip pen and number 1 and 2. They were genetic double-densely diskettes, IBM compatible. Possibly contained something Laurie Peterson was working on at VMC, the medical college, where there are numerous computers at the disposal of students and physicians. There didn't appear to be a personal computer inside the house. On a wicker chair in the corner, between the chests of drawers and window clothes were neatly laid. A pair of white cotton slacks and red and white striped short-sleeved shirt and a brassiere. The garments were slightly wrinkled, as if worn and left on the chair at the end of the day, the way I do sometimes when I'm too tired to hang up my clothes. I briefly perused the walk-in closet and full bath. All in the master bedroom was neat and undisturbed, except for the bed. By all indications, it was not the killer's modus operandi to ransack and commit burglary. Moreno was watching an ID officer open the dresser drawers. What else do you know about the husband? I asked him. He's a grad student at Charlottesville, lives there during the week, comes home Friday night, stays the weekend, then goes back to Charlottesville on Sunday night. What's his discipline? Literature, was what he said. Moreno replied, glancing around at everything. But he's getting his PhD. In what? Literature, he said, slowly announcing each syllable. What sort of literature? His brown eyes fixed emphatically on me. American, from what he's told me. I get the impression his main interest is plays. It seems like he's in one right now. Shakespeare, Hamlet, I think he said. He's done a lot of acting, including some bit parts in movie shot around here, and a couple of TV commercials too. The ID officers stopped what they were doing. One of them turns around, his brush poised mid-air. Moreno pointed the computer diskettes on the desk and exclaimed loudly to grab everyone's attention. Looks like we'd better take a peek at what's on those suckers. Maybe a play he's written, huh? We can take a look at them at my office. We've got a couple of IBM... Oh, we can take a look at them at my office. We've got a couple of IBM-compatible PCs, I offered. PCs, he drawled. Yo, beats the hell out of my RC. One Royal Caprola. Standard issue. Black, boxy, sticky keys, the whole 9 yards. An ID officer was pulling something out from beneath a stack of sweaters in a bottom drawer. A long-bladed survival knife with a compass built into the top of the black handle and a small whetstone in a pocket on the sheath. Touching it as little as possible, he placed it inside an evidence bag. Out of the same dresser drawer came a box of Trojans, which I pointed out to Moreno was a little unusual since Laurie Pedersen, based on what I'd seen in the master bedroom, was on oral contraceptives. Moreno and the other officers began expecting cynical speculations. I pulled my gloves off and stuffed them in the top of my bag. The squad can move her, I said. The men turned in unison, as if suddenly reminded of the brutalized dead person in the center of the rumpled turned-down bed. Her lips were pulled back as if in pain from her teeth. Her eyes swollen to slits, staring blindly up. A radio message was relayed to the ambulance, and several minutes later 2 paramedics in blue jumpsuits came in with a stretcher. Which they covered with a clean white sheet and placed flush against the bed. Laurie Pedersen was lifted as I directed, bedclothes folded over her and gloved hand not touching the skin. She was gently placed on the stretcher, the sheet pinned at the top to ensure no evidence was lost or added. Velcro straps made a loud ripping sound as they were peeled apart and fastened across the white cocoon. Moreno followed me out of the bedroom, and I was surprised when he announced, "I'll walk you to your car." Matt Pedersen was on his feet as we came down the hall, his face wan, his eyes glassy. He stared at me, desperately needing something only I could give, assurance, a word of comfort, the promise his wife died quickly and did not suffer, that she was tied up and raped after the fact. There was nothing I could say to him. Moreno led me back through the living room, out the door. The front yard was lit up with television lights floating against a background of hypnotically flashing red and blue. The staccato voices of disembodied dispatchers competed with the throbbing engines as a gentle rain began to fall through a light fog. Reporters with notepads and tape recorders were everywhere, waiting impatiently for the moment when the body was carried down the front steps and slid into the back of the ambulance. The television crew was on the street, a woman in a snappy belted trench coat talking into a microphone, her face serious as a grinding camera recorded her at the scene for Saturday's evening news. Bill Boltz, the Commonwealth's attorney, had just pulled up and was getting out of his car. He looked dazed, half asleep, and determined to elude the press. He didn't have anything to say, because he didn't know anything yet. I wondered who notified him, maybe Moreno. Cops milled around, a few of them aimlessly probing at the grass with their powerful Kell lights. Some of them clustered around by their white cruisers and talking. Boltz zipped up his windbreaker and nodded as he briefly met my eyes, then hurried up the walk. The chief of police and a major sat along an unmarked beige car, the interior light on, their faces pale as they periodically nodded and made remarks to reporter Abby Turnbull. She was saying something to them through an open window, waiting until we were on the street as she trotted up after us. Moreno warded her off with a flap of his hand. Hey, no comment, in a screw-yourself tone of voice. He stepped up the pace. It was almost a comfort. Ain't this the pits, Moreno said with disgust, as he patted himself down for cigarettes. A regular 3-ring circus, Jesus Christ. The rain was soft and cool on my face as Moreno held the station wagon door open for me. As I turned the ignition, he leaned in with a smirk. Drive real careful, Doc. Okay, chapter 1. All done. Ready for chapter 2 coming up.